The Open Source Creative Podcast, episode 58. Jeremy White.
Oh, we're going to toast marshmallows, are we?
Could be. That's better.
This is the Open Source Creative Podcast, a podcast where I ramble on about creativity, process, and open source software. I'm Jason Van Gumster, your host and driver on the road to creative freedom. This episode's a fun one. I've gotten the privilege of being able to interview Jeremy White, who is the founder of CodeWeavers. He's since retired, but semi-retired, which you'll find out more about in the episode. And he came on and we had a nice long conversation about everything from what he's done with CodeWeavers, what CodeWeavers is and what it does, the wine project, all the cool things they do with that. And we also get in the difference between creatives and engineers, or actually I don't say creatives and engineers because they're, as I talk about in there, engineers are also creative, so it's more artists and engineers, right? So the differences between the two and the way different mindsets of how we approach problems and those sort of things. And it's a great sort of far-reaching conversation that sort of it goes a little bit all over the place. And I have to say, he when I first got in touch with him, he said he was going to be curmudgeonly, and I'm a little disappointed because he is a delightful human being to speak with, and I'm sure you're going to see that when the interview comes in. But rather than keep on talking here, I'm just going to let you go ahead and listen to the interview. Let's do that. So here we are with Jeremy White, and I say your name, and I really should just let you introduce yourself. So let's go ahead and let that happen.
That's kind of you. So I'm Jeremy White. I'm the founder and longtime CEO of CodeWeavers. We are the company that is behind the wine project. So, we're the guys who, and sort of most famously, we've been working with Valve to get Proton to work well so that games run well on Linux. That's probably what we're most known for. We also do a lot of work on the Mac side as well. So I'm fond of saying about wine, it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. I should formally state that I'm no longer the CEO of CodeWeavers. I retired 3 years ago, and then I flunked retirement, so I'm sort of back working part time.
I hear
that's kind of my deal.
That's from my limited experience with people who claim to be retired, that seems to be like a running theme of I'm retired, but not really.
Yeah.
Is that
Well, I think I have the luxury that I can choose to do what I want without needing it to put food on the table, right? Like my kids are all through college. No one's tuition bill is going to bounce if I don't work. It's all good, right? It's so. And so I'm being very it's a lovely place to be because it means what I'm doing each day is what I'm choosing to do rather than what I sort of feel obligated to do, if you will.
right on? Well, yeah. And I'll say related to the sort of the ethos of this podcast and doing creative stuff. I know a lot of people, particularly folks who are migrating to Linux, have looked at CodeWeavers and looked at wine in particular for things like the Adobe suite, which if you can use like the CS2 version from back in the day, you can usually get away with it. But any of the stuff that's running on Adobe Cloud tends to break because there's a lot of background processes that shit the bed, basically.
Yeah. There's some hard problems there.
Right.
There's actually the biggest one historically has been the copy protection. They've got a fairly hardcore copy protection system that's pretty hard to support because that's what we need to do. We need to support it,
right?
Circumvent it. We make sure it runs as intended, right?
Yeah, and because
that ends up being hard.
My earliest exposure to CodeWeavers was specifically with Crossover Office. Before
sure.
This is before LibreOffice or OpenOffice, and then LibreOffice became more, I'll say, acceptable for use.
Sure.
But
sure.
Those that's sort of been my experience with it. Now, if you go look up your name and CodeWeavers, sort of anywhere on the web. Most of the searches involve recently that you left with the notion of an EOT,
Correct.
which I mean, it's not necessarily super related to the podcast, but it's worth talking about since that's what people are going to find. And I'm
Sure.
curious. So just to see if I can correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I've been part of organizations that have been exploring this, but it is a form of employee ownership wherein all the employees are members of a trust for as long as they're employed, and they reap the benefits of the company. But once they're gone, they're there's not like they're beholden to it or anything like that.
Yeah, it's you have a kernel of truth.
Okay.
Yes, the emphasis of what you were going for is correct. The details are subtly different. No one is a member of the trust. The trust is its own independent legal entity, and it has a purpose statement.
Mhm.
And its purpose statement, we have many statements in our purpose, but one of them is that the trust operate the company for the benefit of the staff of the company. Right. So the staff aren't members of the trust, but the trust is sort of benevolently looking over their shoulder for them. And there's other things we're preserving the open knowledge initiatives. In other words, free software. Right. There's a range like that the trust is set up to ensure. But the company still exists. It's a C corporation. Nothing changed from the perspective of command and control and everything. It's still a C corp the way it always was. It still has a board of directors. It still has a CEO. People can be fired and hired in the whole bit. The difference is that the owner of this C corp is now this trust.
Right on.
And so when it gets time to telling the board of directors what to do, the trust says to the board of directors, well, here's what I want you guys to accomplish, instead of the traditional maximize the dollars that my shares are worth.
Right.
So that's the fundamental difference, is that the company is instructed to fulfill this purpose rather than instructed to maximize shareholder dollars, unlike most other companies in the world.
And that's a fairly new concept stateside, right? Even
Correct.
we're 3 years later after you'd done it, and it's still, like I said, it's not sort of filtered its way into the US nearly as much as it has in places like Europe and those sort of things. And I guess seeing as how this is 3 years later, I was going to ask from a retrospective perspective, how do you feel that's gone? Now that I know that you're still you've gone back to doing part-time stuff for them.
Yeah, but I'm not in any kind of position of authority, right? I'm a peon. I'm not a right. The CEO will occasionally ask my advice on things, but I try not to micromanage. Mostly trying not to micromanage, right? I think it's going really well. It's hard to judge, right? Business has been very good, right? So it's really easy to say, oh, it's working great, everything's great, because everything's going well. One of the things that's part of what we do is we have profit sharing, and there's been very healthy profit sharing. Right. So of course everybody's happy, right? Let's have a year with no profit sharing, and let's see how the trust holds up, right? That'll be so and we also, I think there are some long-term risks. Like, one of our concerns is we may not get we have a trust stewardship committee that requires staff to serve on it. It doesn't do very much, but like, we may have trouble getting people to volunteer to be on that, right?
Right.
We're still early days and people are still willing to step up, but could be 5 years from now, I was like, I don't want to be on the TSC, and then we'll have a different problem.
Right. Well, I guess
so far so good.
Okay, cool. Well, and I guess related organizationally, I mean, the relationship between CodeWeavers and the Wine Project, like they're separate projects, but if I recall correctly, the main steward for the Wine Project is the CTO still of
Correct.
CodeWeavers,
Alexander Juilliard. Correct.
and so every piece of open source software has a different sort of organizational structure and governance. Like the one, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the one behind Blender. It is, on some, it makes sense, but man, is it convoluted, right? You have a foundation, and then you have the for-profit studio, and then there's an institute somewhere in there. Like, it gets really, really, it can get really messy and can get
Yeah.
confusing for people who are in the community, because then, the understanding of, okay, well, what's the thing that is my open source core, and what's sort of the sort of sustainable governance for it, and those sort of things.
Right.
How does that work with CodeWeavers related to the wine project, I guess, is my main question.
Yeah, no, and it's a complicated question, and we have our own complicated. I don't think our structure is that complicated, but it's nuanced and it sometimes gets misunderstood. The core of it though is that um, the nucleus of the company are people who are from the wine project. I hired people who loved working on wine and who have the who care about wine, right? And so that tends to be our primary DNA. We're trying to make it better. So we're not trying to wrap it up as a proprietary advantage. We're not trying to control it exclusively for our benefit. We're not trying to do any of those things. With that said, we do have to eat, right? And we were one of the early open core companies, so you can buy crossover in a variety of flavors, and 98% of crossover is wine, and all of that is free software. You can download, it's LGPL. You can get that source code. You can get everything, all of the things we think you can download yourself. But there's that baling wire and glue and polish, and then we ask for money for that, right?
Right.
And that's kind of and it tends to be a more compelling value on the Mac than on Linux. We don't sell very much on Linux anymore. We did historically. Linux was our only market, and now really the majority of our consumer market is Mac, right? And Mac users, they want it polished and simple, right?
Right.
They're not really interested in. So that's been working fairly well. And I think eh, but there is a challenge. You go to a wine conference, right? It's 40 or 50 technical people in a room having conversations. Almost all the people in the room are CodeWeavers employees. And
Mm.
and it's not, we're not trying to squelch the voice of someone who doesn't work for CodeWeavers, but it's just a reality that we are so intermingled with the wine project that there is a hard separation. So you'll sometimes get people feeling that we're, um, I don't know. You'll see some accusations of things that we're secretive, or and we do have confidentiality agreements we have to protect, right? So we do have NDAs we sign, so we are not as free as we would maybe like to be, right?
Right.
But we're broadly, I like to think we're really pretty good stewards, but and obviously, the code's there. You can judge it by the code, right?
Right.
It's we don't try to hide or deceive. And we've had many competitors over the years, but the trick is if you provide a nifty thing that's free as a hobby, well, that's fun, but eventually you get sick of it. And you get sick of answering emails and providing support and helping people, and we do all of that, right? So
Right.
we have a dedicated support team, a dedicated QA team. So it's a nice way of, it's a tricky thing, making money when your core engine is free software. That's hard,
It is, and
you know.
I've run into that with a lot of folks who are making stuff like my background and my core, like my entire pipe is basically is open source, but I'm very closely tied to the Blender side of things,
Right.
and there's a I think the number of people who are building products around Blender has continued to grow, but
Right.
those people are also, they don't have necessarily a business experience or marketing experience or those sort of things, and they tend to forget about things like maintenance and that. So they'll either undercharge, or they will give it away for free, and then it'll fizzle off. And I have a couple themes that I need to update that I haven't updated
Yeah.
in a while. There's a few things like that maintenance, that maintenance and support conversation is non-trivial, and I think part of it, I think, in the open source community, a lot of the people who are there were fairly self-starters. So the notion of somebody is there to provide help, well, chances are good I'm not your audience. Right?
Right.
I'm not your ideal customer, but there's a lot more of your ideal customer than there are of me. Um,
Sure.
and I think that's one of those things that's, I guess, is easily missed within the community. What do you think that is?
I don't. Well, I mean, it's the reality of people want things for free, right? It's and I have to tell you, I've been trying to be more deliberate about spending money for software, right? I'm a longtime Linux user. I'm Debian now for God, what am I, 28 years? I'm Debian, something like that, 26, a long time. I used to distro hop when I was a young man. And then someone said to me, yeah, the last distro you'll ever install is Debian. And I was sort of like, oh, and that ended up being true for me. It's anyways. Um, so I've been trying to find ways to spend money to contribute. I've been trying to contribute to Thunderbird, which I use. I've been trying to contribute to Debian, which I use, right? But I sit down at a terminal. I want to type apt install foo and run foo. I don't want any friction, so I don't want some CodeWeavers guy jumping in and saying, hey, we wrote wine, it would be great if you gave us money. That's not part of my vibe, right? I want apt install wine and I want to start running. And I think that's true of a lot of Linux users. It's very free to be an open source, to be a free software user. It's very empowering. And I think people are really accustomed to that. And taking someone's money is a source of friction, right? So, and full stop. I think
Right.
that's a lot of it. So I don't think there's any bad intentions. We are really benefit from, I think broadly the community has been very supportive of us through the years, and everyone has sort of got it. I had just can't count the number of people who said, well, I don't use crossover, but I bought a license because thanks for what you do. Right.
Right.
Great. At the same time, I have to tell you a personal story of probably the moment that brought me the greatest joy. I was over at 3M. I was having lunch with a guy I was doing some unrelated stuff with. We were just talking about life and the universe and everything. And asking about his hobbies. And one of his hobbies is he works on cars. And he got super excited and he told me about how he'd been having some issues because he couldn't get his Windows computer to do the right software thing. But he got Wine on his Linux server in his garage, and it unlocked some stuff he could do in his cars. And he said, well, this Wine stuff is great. He didn't know what I did. He didn't know anything about me. He didn't pay for CodeWeavers. He didn't pay for crossover. Just to me, it's like, that's the joy. Knowing that that's a joy I help bring into the world, just sort of, warmed the cockles of my heart. Right. So anyways, that's what I have always wanted to be here for. And it's really exciting. And it's exciting, every time someone says, yeah, I just play my games on Steam, like that's exciting too. Like, and every time I see Steam OS market share tick up a notch, it's like, oh yeah, I'm happy for that. Right. Because that's the whole new, and sorry, I'm very passionate about all
No,
these
please
things.
do. I'm
It's
I have to
go
admit,
ahead.
I'm a little bit disappointed. When we started emailing conversations back and forth, you said you were going to be curmudgeonly, and I'm not getting any of that right now.
Well, I'm frustrated because I don't think that the bulk of the world understands free software or open software, and it makes me sad because I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think it's been co-opted by commercial, as everything has been. And I'm sad that we don't have open standards, right? I'm frustrated that we have a whole conversation about you're trying to use Jitsi, which is an open source meeting software. This stuff is not rocket science. It should be an open protocol, right? It like, I guess actually this is actually a fairly open protocol, so I shouldn't be curmudgeonly about this. The WebRTC stuff is pretty good. Fair cop. Fair
Yeah.
cop. All right, I'm wrong on that one. I'm mad about chat and email and a few other things, right? Chat's probably my biggest one. I'm still just pissed about that one.
There are many a day where I mourn the abandonment of IRC.
Yeah.
But these things happen. I think, yeah, it's I had something and then like
Oh,
kernel.
sorry, I derailed
No,
you.
no, no, no. It's these sort of like, it is that kind of uh passionate base, and those are the things that tend to drive anyway, right? You're either going to get really driven by being frustrated by something that you want to fix, or you're really driven by something that, well, somebody else was frustrated by and they fixed it for you, and that's awesome. uh,
Right.
that's going to be, my experience, that's where a lot of that tends to live. I guess that's going to the conversation of frustration is why do you think it's, we're, hell, what, 20, over almost 30 years into, I mean, into full-on open source free software being a thing in the world, right?
Right.
Why do you think it's still so? I mean, granted, well, I would do want to say I'm very happy that CodeWeavers didn't put open in their name, because I do think that that's a term that's been
Yes.
co-opted over time
Yes.
that has messed things up in immeasurable ways. But I guess I had to digress there. The question is, why do you think it's still why do you think it's so hard to explain? Like, it, we're in it and we understand it, but that doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, I don't think I'm necessarily any smarter than anybody else. So
I think that the problem is that, you only have so many brain cycles and you have to choose what you care about, right? And the subtleties of copyright and how software is made, those are things you and I choose to care about. Other people care about the score of the Milwaukee game, right? And Brewers are doing great this year. I'm not the Twins are doing terribly. Oh, the Twins are doing okay, but I'm not. I, there's a level of understanding and a detail there that other people are passionate about. And I think that's great. I think the world is a beautiful place when we have all of these different interests and ideas. But I also think that I mean, part of the problem is that, I prefer to talk about free software for all that I have my issues with Stallman and FSF. I'm more a fan of the conservancy. That's my camp of the world. But I think free software is a constructive way of talking about it. But I think the problem is free, immediately has the free beer connotation, and that has a lot of negative connotations in the English language, right? Whereas
right.
the connotation I want to get at is the free speech connotation, right? But it also doesn't allow you to, you do really have to have a very successful technical project surrounded by a lot of companies, like Linux. The Linux kernel has that. I think Apache has that, right? Where you've got Blender, I think to some extent has, you know, a community of people around it, so that there's because one of the great things about free software is it can be a level playing field. It can be
Right.
a shared floor that people can innovate on top of, right? I think that's a compelling value for it. um I don't know, I mean, but I think most of the people don't care, and it's hard. I don't know, I wish, but I've come. So I'm old and curmudgeonly, and I've come to accept that you have to take the world as it is, not as I want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And right, and I think again, it all comes down to incentives, right? And you don't get paid to do a thing in a way that's better for future generations.
Right.
You know, so it, and that I mean, money is money talks, right? It does drive the world. So.
Yeah. And I think I think one of the differentiators that and I've noticed this is because I was just at SIGGRAPH, was it last week, and there's the Academy Software Foundation, which is a open source organization around it's an organization around the open source tools that are used for film, video, game production, sort of stuff. And almost every project, with some very rare exceptions, almost every project is more infrastructure based, right? And so, from a code contribution standpoint, there tends to be a greater interest in these fundamental libraries, as opposed to user space applications. And so, things like Krita, like Blender, like GIMP, like Inkscape, these sorts of tools, they live in the user land, and I know one of the nice things about, for instance, Linux is that you have the core of Linux, but you have every company that not every company, but a large portion of companies that benefit from it actively have somebody hired to write code to send it back. I mean, CodeWeavers is sort of like a little bit more monolithic because it's not necessarily like a lot of other organizations are contributing to Wine, but it's the same sort of model, is that you have a company that's benefiting from whatever the open source base is, contributing code back upstream. And I know that when Ton was running the Blender Foundation, he always wanted that for studios to have developers. Studios have developers to have the developers on hand sending patches upstream, and that never, with a few rare exceptions, that never really materialized. But for libraries and core infrastructure stuff, that happens much more regularly. I had a point I was driving to with that, but now it's just gone. I'm just now
Well, I think
proselytizing.
so. The idea that I had listening to you is that I do think that there's a fundamental difference between um, user interface, UX, UI, and infrastructure, where the former is just an order of magnitude harder, right? Writing a good UI program, that's really hard, and its difficulty is not appreciated, I think. Whereas writing a utility to copy bits from A to B, that's straightforward. It's testable. Do you know what I mean?
It
It's
doesn't
also I
involve
do
people.
it doesn't involve people, right? I think that there is a sort of a personality that's gravitated toward this stuff over the years, and they tend to like to write that back end stuff more than the front, because again, it doesn't involve people, right? Um, and it also, I think the other corollary is I think people tend to pay for the user interface. So there's also that thing
Mm.
of people pay money for Photoshop because um, it's visibly doing a lot. They don't they're not as excited to pay money for a thing that converts a file from one thing to another thing because that's just a background. Or I don't know what my analogy is, what
I mean,
headless utility someone would use,
right.
right?
I mean, you're not going to see somebody spending a lot of money on something like ImageMagick or FFmpeg.
Right, right,
Uh,
right.
but you'll find a lot of people contributing code to it because they're on the back end side of things, and you don't have to. Not only do you not have to interact with people, you don't have to presume their behavior. If you're going to do user interface design or user experience stuff, there's a lot of observing other people and correctly assuming what they're going to do, which is, I mean, you could call it a science, but it's there's a lot of like, I
It's
kind of
more of
think,
an art,
right.
yeah.
And I mean, it's I'll say it's an opinionated science.
So art.
I mean, yeah, there we go. Yeah, I think that is a firm differentiator, and I think that's also one of the reasons why. But I think you do have the people for their spaces, right? I think for a lot of the creative tools, probably over half of the developers were originally artists, and the tool didn't do the thing they needed it to do. And so they had to
Right,
figure out how,
right.
they're frustrated engineers at that point. They had to figure out how to write enough code to make it do the thing they wanted. And then suddenly, oh crap, I'm a maintainer.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen that story play out quite a few different times there. So um, that's been pretty
Yeah.
fun.
I mean,
I,
most wine people come in because an app doesn't work. They figure out why, they submit a patch, and then they kind of get, or two or three, and then they're hooked, right? That's how most wine devs get hooked. Same thing.
well, and I guess related to creative userland things. I mean, I know that you said that crossover, not crossover, sorry, CodeWeavers and Wine. CodeWeavers in particular has a lot of their emphasis on the Mac audience and the gaming audience with your involvement with Valve. I know that there are a lot of, there's, and I keep bringing up Adobe, and because everybody's like, Creative Suite. Oh, it's Adobe. I'm going to use that. But you see the stuff that, after they've been acquired by Canva, the stuff that's going on with Affinity still doesn't have any kind of Linux presence whatsoever. And I have not, I've played with it through emulation. I have not actually tried it through Wine or through crossover. Do you know where that sits or where that's at?
I haven't, again, I'm semi-retired, so I haven't kept up with I don't really have a sense for that, I'm afraid.
No
No.
worries. I was more hoping that you'd just been playing with it, but
No, no, and awkwardly, I'm whatever a visual guy is, I'm the
mm,
opposite of that, right?
okay.
I couldn't draw to save my life, right? It's I hated it when people want to play, those games that involve drawing pictures. I'm always horrified at that. So I like working with the CNC. I like, I mean, I am a member of the Twin Cities maker community here. I volunteer enormously with high school robotics. I help kids build robots, but that's lovely because they're, you know, uh, shapes and mechanical things, and I can cut parts on a CNC. That's my creative, right?
well,
That's my maker capabilities, right?
well,
But
and
freehanding something, no, you don't want that from me.
well, I actually I want to go into the stuff you do with robotics and those sorts of things too, because that's so I have both an engineering background and a creative background, which
Okay.
I don't recommend people pursuing those at the same time. It melts your brain. But I happen to have survived brain melting. But one of the things that I've noticed, at least one of the things that I feel that I've noticed, is that the thing that differentiates an engineer from an artist, they're both creative problem solvers, and one of them is willing to tolerate math. Um, that's and I'm not gonna. I mean,
Well,
you can guess which one
sure,
of
one
that
of them
is.
enjoys math, sure, but yeah,
I mean,
right.
they don't. You don't even have to enjoy it. They're just willing to tolerate doing it.
Sure, sure.
But the other one is that there's a difference in how they approach problems. Where an engineer is more often likely to take a problem, break it down to smaller constituents, solve each of those constituents, and hope that the gestalt of it all ultimately solves the ultimate problem. Whereas uh, an artist's approach tends to work top down and say, this is the problem, and I'm going to work on the problem. And then, oh, this little piece broke off. I got to fix that little thing too. And this little thing broke off, and I have to work on that thing too. And it's just, they're both coming at problems. They're going to be very creative about doing it. They just come in from different directions. You know, and even then, things like drawing, you know, 9 times out of 10, when they say draw, you draw your form shapes first. So you're still doing these, you know, but you're drawing.
Sure.
I guess the difference is that when you draw, you do big to little, right? If I'm going to draw a face, I draw an oval for the whole face first. I'm not going to start with the eyes because then my proportions are all going to be jacked. And that's sort of the difference in those mindsets. And I think I'm curious about how that might apply with what you do with CNCs and what you do with robotics and those sort
Well,
of things.
so to take your analogy, right? So an engineer, and I'm going to mangle your analogy, right? So an engineer is someone who enjoys math, right?
Mm,
And maybe tolerates, right? However you want to slice it. I think an artist is someone who enjoys sketching with pen and pencil, paper, right? So sure. There's a universe in which I could be an artist, right? But I don't enjoy. I'm not competent at. I've never been drawn to
mm,
anything where I create a visual medium. And in fact, I tend not to be a very visual person. I have the personality trait that I prefer 2D top-down video games with, simple isometric, maximum information density and not maximum beauty, right?
right, right.
Whereas, this whole, the video games pushing towards more and more, shaders and things. I don't care about any of that junk because anyways, um, so I think you're right that they're complement, or different sets of creativity. And I think that um and I don't know where I had somewhere I was going with this and now I've lost it, but
Ah, it's
so for me
contagious.
it's the creativity of, so like in CNC, one of the interesting problems is I have a sheet of aluminum that's so big, and the kids want these parts, and so one of the jobs is figuring out, okay, how do I use the whole sheet? Cut all these parts, and you got to have clearances, and I enjoy that. But that's sort of more of a, I mean, I guess it's a visual puzzle, but it is, but that's about as artistic as I get in the CNC part of it, if I'm being honest.
That's fair.
You
That's
know.
fair. And so I guess in the robotic stuff that you're doing, are you guys using like Arduino based sort of stuff or kit based stuff, or what do you know?
It's I do first
Okay,
robotics competition. That's the big ones in the high schools, and there's a whole prescribed Linux computer that has a prescribed software stack on it, and so that's what all the code is written on and runs on. And there's an enormous amount of freedom, but there are design patterns that become very prevalent. So they're not mandatory, but they're sort of, they're so de facto that everybody does them, right? You're cutting your parts out of aluminum. You're using this kind of 2x1 box tube aluminum rail for your chassis. Everyone has a swerve drive. Swerve drives are just the coolest thing ever, right? So there's these fun commonalities. The fun part of it is, for me at least, is we're working with high school students, and so
right.
it's a really, I think it's a great competition. I think it's well put on, but the joy of helping students understand that they can create art, that they can be an engineer, that they can build this. At the end of a competition season, in an ideal result, they can look with some real great pride on a really cool thing that they built, that they would have not thought that they could have built. And that to me is I enjoy that, right? And I
Right.
enjoy that journey. I enjoy watching them on that journey, and I get to play a little too. It's sort of fun to imagine because nobody knows what the right answer is, right? It's sort of fun to imagine. Oh, should we, shoot more or shoot more accurately? How are we gonna? What's our trade off? So and that's actually ends up being I'm semi-retired, and that's what I spend the bulk of my non CodeWeavers time doing is working with high schoolers.
Nice.
So
Well, and so do you do a lot on like is it I guess is it more of a mentorship sort of thing, or is there actually more sort of teaching specific things?
we call ourselves mentors. So
Hmm.
the volunteers, the title we aspire to is mentor. And right, you want the ideal result is the kids do it, but they have
Right.
to learn it somehow, right? So yeah, there's a lot of teaching. There's sort of a rubric they give that we use sometimes, but it's helpful to think about is it's mentor do, student watch, student do, mentor watch, right? And
Right.
then student do. Like that's the progression, right? And that's how the student learns to do the thing. These days, it's sort of frustrating because these days, the hard problem is all solved in CAD. So it's
Mm.
all CAD these days, right? So it used to be when I first started, it was more hands-on and what I call cardboard CAD. But the truth is, it's a lot easier to figure out if this mechanism will fit inside this robot. If you could just click and drag it rather than cutting it and building it, and then oh crap, it doesn't fit. Now what?
Right.
Right? It's a lot faster and easier, so that's why we do it in CAD. But it does take away some of the fun of it, I guess.
The tactile nature of like grabbing and digging
Yeah,
the
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
which is
Well, because kids sit at computers all day,
right.
right? So it's like here's a power saw, here's a drill, here's a drill press, here's a mill, go cut some aluminum, right?
Right.
That's a much more fun thing to do, or it's novel anyways, I guess.
Right. Well, and I mean, and I guess that's the thing is when you're dealing with real materials, there is uh, there's a bigger cost in going backwards. Like, oh, I did it wrong. It's the wrong size. Oh, now this entire piece is scrap. I've got to work on something else, which is I sort of ironically backwards from like the work of like a digital creative or an animator. You're going to be much faster with a piece of pencil and piece of pencil on a paper, with a pencil and a piece of paper to sketch out an idea or scribble it out, and sort of because you can while it's a raw material, pencil graphite is cheap, right? And so
Right.
it's way cheaper than whatever time it's going to take you to build something in 3D
It
or do
it
whatever.
it also flows quickly from your brain, right?
Right.
Whereas, yeah, even a tablet on a drawing tablet doesn't quite flow. I don't know. I'm not an artist, but my sense is it's not quite as fast to get it from brain to paper
Well,
or to
even
surface.
well, even like there's also a psychological component, even with like writing, right? So I do a lot of writing as well. The difference between writing something by hand versus typing it,
Mhm.
it is there's a measurable difference in how your
Yeah.
brain treats that information. And I think there is something to be said about that, even if it's not drawing. I remember there was a study at one point where if you were trying to learn something or memorize something, um, it was beneficial to have just a blank piece of paper and a pen and just make marks on it, not even looking at it while you're reading whatever you're studying, because that mechanical mental bridge did a thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
No, I think there's a study. And I only read headlines these days, but there was a study where they had a control group of kids, like and one of them was just writing down notes, and then they didn't get the notes, right? But then they took a test, and the ones that wrote the notes, substantially outperformed because there's something you're absolutely right that the way our brains are wired, there's something about this physical act that really helps us. And I think that's a joy we've lost a little bit in the modern age. The joy of working with your hands and your body is, I don't know. I mean, I've been a geek my whole life, so I sit at a keyboard, all the time, and I love it. But I've always loved the Minority Report concept. And we're not there yet, but it would be great to be, coding like this instead of,
we'd have
you know,
we'd have much stronger shoulders and less weak, not quite the finger strength, I guess that we,
yeah.
or the dexterity. I guess it's more dexterity than strength. All right, easy one, hopefully.
I can make anything hard.
Oh, fantastic. No, I mean, really, is there anything I hadn't asked you or I haven't asked you that you want me to ask you about? Because that's I sort of, like I said, I freeform these quite a bit, and so it's
Sure.
very easy for me to digress and to take all these fun little things. Like, oh, this is the thing I wanted to say.
Well, and this is open source creative. So you're trying to talk to people who are interested in open processes and who are also sort of creative with it. And I think the thing I'm curious to explore is why why am I sad that why am I curmudgeonly? Why am I sad that it feels like free software hasn't spread as widely? And maybe it has. Maybe I'm curmudgeonly in that we've won and I'm not willing to claim the victory, or I'm not willing to, because no one's writing a new piece of proprietary desktop software, right? Like that, you don't do that now, right? You write a web app,
Yeah, it's all
right?
it's all SaaS or those sort of things.
You do write a new phone app, and the mobile apps are proprietary, right? Like the bulk of mobile apps are proprietary, aren't they? Yeah, I think I have
Yeah,
that
yeah.
right.
There's, I mean, you can jump on FreeDroid, F-Droid, sorry, not FreeDroid, F-Droid, and find a whole bunch of open source tools, and I use a whole set of them. But I think in the user facing application space, most of your proprietary stuff is happening on mobile and in the SaaS space. It's um, the notion of charging a subscription for something you have to install. I feel people look at that as an alien sort of concept, where it's like, oh, I have to install this thing, so therefore it's mine. Why should I have to keep paying for it? Um, Disregarding the fact of what we've already talked about maintenance, and even paid software has maintenance costs. So this whole concept of paying for what you're doing and those sort of things uh, on a continual basis is um, challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so one of the other things I did have done and I'm still doing a little bit of is volunteering as a mentor to startups,
Mm.
right? So, Minnesota has a great organization for that where you're a mentor to startup folks. And so I am a businessman, right? And I go to conferences and I talk to venture capitalists and I try to understand, what helps someone get funding, what helps someone make a business that's viable, right? And all the cool kids, it's mandatory now to talk about software as a service and your monthly recurring revenue. Like if you are trying to start a business and you don't have a story about your monthly recurring revenue, you are not going to get any money. Nobody's going to talk to you, right? And I'm a little bit sad about that because again, I kind of liked the old model of right. I bought this thing and then I installed it and it was mine. If I wanted to update or a new version, I'd pay again. But it's kind of, although I'm a Linux guy, so I think it's all free and I can just app install it, right? And that's the real way it should be. So I don't know. I mean, and it may be that the world is better than I think because that like the floor has been rising. Like
Mhm.
like like if you think back to 1987, um, in the early 90s and in the 90s, all the software was proprietary, right? No human worked with anything that was, and the internet, was the beginning of that change, and Linux was the accelerant for that. Where now, I mean, right, I'm complaining about mobile phones. Well, but the phone in my pocket is predominantly, free software, right? It's a Linux kernel, and so maybe it's better than I think. I wish that I wish it feels like there's confusion
Mhm.
and uncertainty, and people don't understand it as clearly as one. And I personally blame the English language because if we had software Libra, I think we'd be better off. I think that somehow that would convey the fullness of what I mean for it to mean, rather than it just being free beer.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those sad things in that, like, free was a very conscious decision at the very beginning, but conscious consciously, I'll say duplicitous in terms of its the choice of using that term. Open tried to resolve that, but it was also couched in a different context, which has allowed it to be reappropriated in basically all the problems that we had with free in the English language have now been applied to open in the English language.
Right.
And there's a part of me that's like, people are, if we would show, if Libra was there, it would get reappropriated in some goofy way.
Yeah, you may be right that the vocabulary just, yeah, that's fair.
I mean,
That's a fair point.
so it's I mean, even if it was called freedom software, and that's going to be a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's
so
complicated in a different way.
That's
Yeah.
a different kind of complication, because I mean, how do you politicize the word freedom? But apparently that's happened. That's so I don't know if we could ever escape that, because there is a level of selfishness that comes with all of this. And anything that has traction, anything that has eyeballs, is going to get borrowed to benefit an individual, in some form or another.
Yeah.
And that's this goes back to, I guess, what you were saying before, is the difference between the state of things versus the way they are versus the way they, we feel they ought to be. This might be one of those inherent truths of, it'd be really nice if people, but they're people.
Yeah. And it is really nice. Like, I am delighted. I'm sitting here on a computer that is all free software, right? And there are people who work in their basement and they don't get paid, and they submitted a patch to that obscure library that I don't know about, but that without that patch, right, my whole computer falls apart. So I am grateful that that's happening, and I hope that they're having fun with it, right? I mean, it's all about having fun in the world, right? So I do think that, I'm failing to be curmudgeonly, I do think that things are better than I want to admit. It's just, the problem is that it's so easy to imagine more, and it's so easy to see kind of you just go talk to people on the street, and and you talk about open source or free software, and they smile and nod politely.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? But there's no real understanding of it. There's also tends not to be a lot of curiosity. Because I think it's so cool. I think it's this just, digital things allow you to the whole, and to me it's the copyleft that I find
Right.
captivating, right? That this is just this cool concept that we can do in the digital realm, and people don't care.
Right. Well, I mean,
they really don't care.
I think it takes a certain sort of person to appreciate sort of, I'm going to call it ironic subversion of something like the copyleft, right? Because you're using intellectual property law kind of against itself, which is, I mean, as anybody who has any appreciation for recursion,
Right.
is going to love that in a heartbeat. But if you have to explain recursion to somebody,
Right.
then you've already lost them. And so I think there's that component of that.
Right.
But I think there is something to be said about the coming at it from, if I were thinking about it and wanting to, promote this more, and I guess I have a podcast, so I am thinking about it and wanting to promote it more.
Right.
It coming at it from the and you've seen a lot of organizations do this, the notion of self-sovereignty with your software, of not having vendor lock-in, of being privacy conscious, and of course the freedom to break it or fix it however you want. I think those are things that can have traction, but each of those is their own sort of subculture and sub niche, that it's hard to say, this free software or open culture or anything as a giant umbrella, and bring all of these very disparate, not desperate. It might get desperate, disparate concerns into the same space. That would be a challenge worth pursuing.
Yeah. I mean, although you're seeing some noise, right? Some of the, particularly with the current political situation, a lot of governments are feeling like, well, we should be using software that's not controlled by a foreign power, right? I mean, so presumably that should be open source software that they can self-host or that they can source from multiple vendors, so that if someone goes rogue, they can, right. Trying to think of a joke of a key software component that's dependent on one guy in the Netherlands. So when the Dutch go rogue, we're still safe, right?
Isn't that
But
NTP?
yeah, maybe I'm not sure. They have probably a lot of software dependent on Dutch guys. They're
Yeah.
they're big in the open source. And yeah, and that's been one of my broad frustrations. Like, one of the sorrows of my life has been I've been involved in a number of conversations with large organizations, governments, city of Munich way back in the day, and way back in the day, and not their most recent effort, right?
Right.
And the conversation goes, yeah, we want to get free from Microsoft, we want to be on free software, we want to control our own destiny, we're going to save so much money, blah 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 blah, all these good things. And then at the end of the day, Microsoft comes in and says, well, what if we discount the Windows and Office by 50%? And they're like, sold, right? And poof, off they go. And that kills me, right? Like, I've
Right.
spent a lot of my sales energy in the world has been helping people get a deal on Microsoft software, and that does not bring me joy.
Yeah, no,
That
it does. That is something I think is worth being frustrated and curmudgeonly about, because it is, if the argument is independence and freedom, but the counter argument is, oh, I got a discount, then it tastes hypocritical. It tastes like you're not really coming to the table with a genuine intent to do a thing. And actually, I've run into this in my own different realms where, like, you want to have, you don't want to be single source for any particular vendor, but except for IT. Right.
sure.
It's because you want to have a single throat to choke. But especially if you're talking, and I've dealt with this when dealing with things related to security. And it's like, well, if you're worrying about who to blame when something goes sideways, you've already lost the conversation. Um,
Yeah,
and that the whole notion of having multiple vendors and being able to do that is going to complicate your supply chain. But
right.
that's kind of the price, the price you pay for being able to be independent. And I guess that's, from an individual standpoint, it's the same sort of thing, right? For anybody who's in you wanting to do creative work with open source tools, there's multiple. Like, if you're just thinking about 2D.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I'm grossly ignorant of this. What is the state of the art of file formats in the creative side? For storing a video, storing a graphic image, storing an animation, right? Are are we all using proprietary Adobe formats that we've hacked and can run? Is there an open standard? What is the what, like?
So this goes back to the XKCD of their 14 standards, and we have to fix that. And now there's 15.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that's
because what
yep.
happens is every especially with user facing applications, every application, because at the end of the day, it's an opinionated science. You want to be able to make your tool do all the crazy wild things that you want it to do. Um, and that means that you don't necessarily want to be beholden to somebody else's tool chain and governance and decision making process. And like, one of the best examples of this is actually with Blender. I was at SIGGRAPH, and there's an open source, there's a format called USD. It's the Universal Scene Description, and that was actually open sourced by Pixar, if I recall. Or initially was open sourced by Pixar, and then it's been under the umbrella of the SWF. And people look at it and say, well, this is an open source format. Blender should be the reference platform for this, right? Blender's open source. This is open source. Why aren't they working together? And the challenge with that is specifically when it comes to USD, USD is not just a format. It's a pipeline. It's a framework and a platform for how you do work. And it's opinionated about how you should be organizing your files and doing these sorts of things. And this means that in order for Blender to fully support that format, a lot of the things, suddenly Blender has to work in a way that connects to that format, which that format came out of the media and entertainment industry. Blender is not just used for that, right? Blender is used in makerspaces and used in 3D printing for makerspaces and astrophysics and molecular biology and all these other different places where something like USD doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. And so then it's like, okay, well, we can extend USD, but now Blender has to send a patch upstream and wait for the USD folks to approve it, get it fixed, and say yes.
Right.
And then it comes back down to them. So what you end up with is you end up having, from a format standpoint, you have interchange formats that get close on the things that are sort of mostly universal from one application to another. But when it comes to anything that involves workflow or involves usable features, then it's like, okay, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this data, pull it into my application, and now it's native to that application. So it's weird. It's kind of a proprietary mindset, but it's not based on anything related to business or money. It's mostly like I'm making it my own. I'll say proprietary, my own internal format, so that I have the ability to do the things that I want. And I mean, you see that with the Blender Foundation, because I describe them as being pathologically independent, right? They're not on GitHub. They don't run on any of the chat platforms. They self-host nearly everything. And you see a lot of other organizations doing the same sort of thing. It's like, well, once I get into the application, it is that application's format. And then you have to worry about interchange. And the interchange then depends on, well, how much information is really valuable for whatever part of the pipeline you're working in. So that one's a hard one.
That's actually fascinating, because I think that's one of my bitter complaints, is that I think that we as a species, right, like, why on earth are we letting Microsoft determine the file format used to exchange, documents? Like, what universe is it where we gave them that power? Like that's our power. Why have we abrogated that power, right? But it there, as with Blender, it sort of happens organically, and it responds to the needs of the application. And I think you get technical debt and other things that, I'm sure that there's less than ideal. I just wish that we were doing this with kind of I like that Blender is aware of this tension, right, and so maybe you can get a refinement to the standard, or a better standard, and eventually it can resolve. And in the end, in worst case, I got the Blender source code, I can go reverse engineer the file format, right? Like, unlike, a docx file, right, which is this monstrosity that, right. And you have the same thing with chat, like you said, with chat platforms. I mean, there's
formats are an important thing to me. I spent a chunk of time a couple of years ago. There is no really standard interchange format for 2D animation. There isn't. SVG could be, but nobody uses it for that. They only use they make the static image, and then if you want to do animation, you're doing some sort of web thing where you're basically doing CSS looping and those sort of things on it, where it's there's not a tool that, like, you can't pull 2D animation in OpenTunes or whatever and do an interchange format. The closest thing that exists, painfully, is SWF, old Shockwave Flash format. Which is half documented, and even Adobe doesn't have the full documentation on it.
Right.
And I actually have written an importer for that, and it is fraud. So like, this is like having, even, I think the notion of having, I think we can't get around the process, the notion of, I want to be able to have my tool do whatever it wants as a developer. I don't want to be beholden to something farther upstream. For things that are more established, FFmpeg, for instance, it's easier to accept that. But if you're like, I have a tool that does this and I want it to do this other thing, but the formats don't support it, well, then the more interesting thing there is probably an interchange format that supports whatever subset of the features that you want. Which is also, I guess, why I do a lot of writing, for instance, in Markdown, as opposed to ODT.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people have done that too. So, all right.
So we have
Yeah, I don't know how long I don't know how long you try to keep these two, and you get to trim it, so you can cut it all.
I want to be super respectful of your time, and I'm really appreciating that you came on.
I
and
enjoy it. Yeah, this is the stuff I love talking about. So next time you'll have to do it with a beer, though. That makes it more fun. But,
I'll have to remember that one. Maybe I can set that up.
Then I get more curmudgeon.
Perfect. So being semi-retired and not necessarily doing the social sort of thing, if you have any of that, is there anything you want to point, even if it's not for you, is there anything that you would like to point people to and say, you should go check out this thing?
Oh, what's a cool thing in the world? There's so many cool things in the world. I don't know. I think I would tend to be the one to point people towards the old diehards that aren't getting the love they deserve. Debian and Firefox, right? The Mozilla Foundation, the Apache Foundation, right? I mean, I think the Blender Foundation, right? I think that here's what I would exhort people to do. I would exhort them to do what I did. I've come to a point in my life where I no longer need to steal games because I can afford to buy them. I don't have, do you know what I mean? Like, I can afford for my money to go to pay for people's hard work. And so I have tried to be very thoughtful about am I financially supporting the people who write the software that I love? And I've tried to be very deliberate about it. So I encourage your listeners to do the same thing. If they support open source and they think it's great, go put your money where your mouth is. Go find the thing you love and go donate some money to it. Everybody takes money. So,
and I think that is probably the best closing to have for the whole thing. So thank you very much for being on. It's been a fantastic conversation. And I'll thank you.
All right, great. Well, I appreciate the interest and thanks again, and good luck. I hope you find more interesting folks to talk to. And here's hoping when I'm a curmudgeon 30 years from now, I'll be complaining about the other great things that have happened, but the missing pieces yet. So
fantastic. And that's the episode. Told you it was a really good one. Lots of great conversation in there. A lot of great things to talk about, and I'm really, really thankful that he took the time to come and speak with me, so you can hear it. So that's fantastic. And there will be more interviews coming. So I have a couple of good ones coming up, and it's going to be pretty exciting. So stay tuned. Tell other people about the podcast, because it's been a number of years since I was doing episodes regularly, and I'm trying to bring it out of fadery, but that requires having people listening to it, and that makes me want to do it more, and makes guests want to come on and talk to us. So the more that I can get people listening to the podcast and show that there are people listening to the podcast, the more we can get people to come and talk to us and do those sort of things. So if you could do me a favor and sort of share this around and tell people that it's awesome, and hopefully we can validate that opinion by being awesome, then we can do great things. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. Please share this around. And if you do have the ability to do reviewing on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, whether it's going to be I'm on Spotify or just obviously you can do a comment on the Open Source Creative Podcast website, which is opensourcecreative.org. You can also comment on social medias and those sort of things. And then, of course, Apple Podcasts also has it. And I'm sure there's a few other places that I'm forgetting. But do the review thing, do the sharing thing. We need more people to know about the fact that there is free software, there is open source software that's available for doing creative stuff. And that's why we're here. So that's what I've got. And see you next time. It's time to get to work.
There, sweetheart.
Myself to the ship, but they've crippled it. I can't take off or fire the gun, and they're coming for me now.
And this is the last job.